Los Angeles police thought that the murder of a young woman last March was an isolated act of violence, but since then they've come to believe that it was connected to a wide-ranging series of assaults by a killer who's become known as the Night Stalker, a killer who apparently struck again during the weekend. Today, the search for California's Night Stalker continues, and many residents sleep with their doors and windows bolted tight, despite 100-degree temperatures. The same man is suspected in 6 to 8 murders and 25 to 30 attacks. Now dubbed the Night Stalker, the crime spree covers 50 miles. The suspect varies the time, place, and type of attack, but he always enters through an open door or window.
Well, I guess the saga starts off when I was growing up in Pico Rivera. Originally, the city was called Pico. 1957, they incorporated, became the city of Pico Rivera. And I grew up on the block right around the corner where I lived. My street ran into an intersection of Holbrook and Doolin Avenue, and I became part of what was recognized as the Holbrook Boys. Just a bunch of teenagers growing up on the block, hanging together, defended each other, had fun with each other, and everybody had their own nicknames. Today they would call it a gang. So everybody had nicknames from Wolf to White Owl, and I was called the Hog. And everybody hung around with each other, and we were family. And if one got in a fight, we were all there. And if anybody had troubles, we all had troubles. Al Arias, Al being short for Alfonso, was a deputy sheriff who used to come around the block checking on all of us people on the block. And what I thought was fun was actually, I've learned later on as I became a cop, it was good police work. Al would come by, put us all on the hood, pat us down, shake us down for weapons, and joke around with us. And when he found nothing, would then just get on his way and go. Always trying to talk to us and tell us to stay out of trouble and try to stay off the streets and just try to keep us as straight as possible, which we were whenever he was around. And one day he was trying to become, I guess, what would be called today as a mentor. And he would tell, if there's anything I can ever do to help you guys, do anything to help you get off the street, let me know. Well, at that time, I was a senior in high school and I was going to fail. I wasn't going to pass. I'd have been the first one in my family with 4 older sisters that hadn't graduated from high school. And my English teacher told me, if you write a term paper, I'll give you a D, which will allow you to pass, because English was a required class, required subject. And as a result of that, I said I would, and I asked Al Arias one night, I said, hey, you said you'd help us. Would you help me write a paper? I want to write it on cops. So he helped me write the paper. And I was able to submit it. I passed. And after he helped me out the last time, he gave me a ride home to my house and said, you want to talk to my parents? And he told them then, sign for this young man to get off the streets or he'll end up dead or in prison. So my parents took his advice. And right after graduation, I entered the United States Army at age 17. My birthday that year was November 29th, 1967. I was turning 18. By this time, I'm in the Army, and on February 1st, 1968, I landed in Vietnam. And Vietnam was just at the beginning of the Tet Offensive, which was an offensive put on by the North Vietnamese Army, and this was right in the middle of what was referred to then as the Vietnam conflict. It was a war. And I went there. I was assigned to the 189th Assault Helicopter Company, where I flew on what was referred to as slick helicopters, which our mission was to insert, extract, medevac, resupply, anything. It was a utility helicopter with a crew of 4. Anything they needed, we were there. We were their workhorse. And anytime we'd get shot at, we'd return fire and pull up and out of the way, and the gunships would come in behind us and protect us, destroy whatever tried to shoot us. And that was what I did for the first 6 to 7 months. And then the last 7 months that I was there, I flew as a crew chief on Huey gunships. And those were ships that went in that escorted the slicks and went out on nothing but shoot 'em up defense missions and offensive missions. Whatever we were assigned for the day, that's what we do. We had miniguns, rockets, and 40 millimeter cannons on there. And of course, we had 60s mounted or unmounted on both sides. We used them as freewheeling 60s with a pistol grip on them. There on the gunships, there was no landing out there and no resupply. All you did was fly protective missions for the slicks, and that's what we did. But it was at this time, flying gunships, that I received a letter from my then girlfriend, who I had asked her parents for her hand in marriage upon my return, and once I had left the service. And the letter was what was referred to commonly as a Dear John letter, saying that I was over there, she was here safe in the United States, and she started seeing someone else, and it's too far away. She didn't want to continue our relationship. Therefore, it was over. So if you can think about it, my heart was broken. It was a very sad time in my life for me, but got through it because you had more important things to worry about. You had combat. I wanted to live. And so in June of 1970, I was separated from the service. I was out, and I came out of the service with 3 goals in mind. Number 1, I wanted to go to college. Nobody in my family, not cousins, no siblings, nobody in my family had ever gone to college, and I wanted to be the first one in my family to go to college. And I knew I was mature then, ready to accept it, because I was embarrassed when I received my transcripts from high school. I was embarrassed because I obviously thought when I was in school, D stood for damn good and F was fabulous. But I made it. They accepted me into the local junior college because I was a combat veteran. That was goal number 1. Goal number 2 was to become a cop. I wanted to become a cop so I could give back what that cop gave to me, and that was the way of Al Arias, who had tutored, mentored me, and kept me safe on the streets, off the streets, and therefore I wanted to do that for somebody else. It was extremely important for me. And the third thing was I wanted to see if I could start dating my ex-girlfriend or former girlfriend, getting her out of the palm of my hands, and then break off with her just like she had done to me. I wanted to see her suffer. I wanted revenge, and revenge was to be mine. Well, by September of 1970, we were pretty much going around together, and I had her eaten out of the palm of my hand. And December 26th of 1970, booyah, we got married. And we just finished celebrating our 55th wedding anniversary, so things worked out for the good. 3 children, 4 grandkids, 1 great-grandchild. My house, we're safe. We're all relatively healthy. And life is good. Once I became a deputy, I tried finding Al Arias, and I couldn't find him. He was no longer working for the department. He had gone off medically. And as a result of him going off medically, I couldn't do it without... It was problematic. I couldn't find him. And one day when I was working a plainclothes gang unit, my hair was a little longer. I'm in non-uniform, and I had just got done taking somebody that I had arrested and put him in the back, one of the back cells at the local substation. And as I came walking out of the jail area, there's Al Arias wearing a suit and tie, and he's with a sergeant from Detective Bureau at that station. And I looked at him and I said, Al Arias. And he says, oh no, I heard you had done good and you'd become a cop. And I said, Al, I did. And I lifted up my shirt and I showed him my badge, at which time we embraced and we cried. And I told him I owe it all to you, Al. And he's the one that gave me my start and helped save me from the streets of destruction. And as a side note to that, everybody that grew up on the block that went into the military came back, all led productive lives, all did well. Those that didn't ended up dead or in prison, just like Al had said it would. And so we went our separate ways, and he started talking to the sergeant. Boy, I remember this guy when he was running the streets and getting in trouble. And I'm just so happy. I'm so proud of him. And years later, I ran into Al again. Al was with his wife at a local hardware store, and my wife was with me. And I said, Al, let me introduce you to my wife. And he put his hand out and he said, ma'am, he says, it's a pleasure to meet you. You don't know me, but I knew your husband when he was a teenager running the streets. And my wife said, oh, but no, I know all about you because it was you that saved him. And I want to thank you. At which time we all embraced and cried. Al, wherever he's at, he's got to be up in heaven by now. But he was a good man and made me, helped make me what I am today. I stood there at East LA Gangs, working at unit for a while, and that was after I'd come on. I swore on as a deputy October 1st, 1971, and then March 23rd of 1981, I was called up and asked to work Homicide Bureau. They had started a gang homicide investigative team, and they wanted me to go up there because of the area that I was working at the time was East Los Angeles in Los Angeles County, and that was, for all intents and purposes, a gang capital of the U.S. I mean, it was crazy gang area, and I had worked on so many gang murders, assisting homicide, that they now wanted my expertise up there with them, which was my immediate goal anyway. I wanted to go to Homicide Bureau because they used to take, it appeared that they were creme de la creme of cops up there. Everybody respected them. Everybody listened to them. Everybody got out of their way. They worked harder than anybody I had seen, and that was my goal. I wanted to one day get homicide. Then and even today, it takes an average of 15 years to get up to sheriff's homicide, and I had been on 9.5 years when I was called up to go to Homicide Bureau, and I was called the kid when I first got there. I was the kid for the first 7 years. I was the youngest guy in Homicide Bureau. There were a bunch of old guys, and that's what started my career working in murders, first in gangs, and then in 1984, they asked me to leave the gang homicide unit and just start doing regular homicides. And I remember my team lieutenant calling me in saying, hey kid, I hear there's rumor that you've been talking to somebody about going to regulars as opposed to leaving the gang unit. And I said, no, I've been asked about it, but I haven't asked anybody, Fitz. I wouldn't leave you. Barrett Fitzgerald was my then team lieutenant. He was one of the guys that I looked up to and respected. He was an investigator when I was working patrol at Homicide Bureau. And I said, no, Fitz, I got to come up. I've worked with you, and I'm not asking to leave. They've asked me about it. They've told me about it, but nothing's set in stone, and I'm not asking to leave. And he said, well, it's too late, kid. It's a done deal. I've been told you're transferring over there, and just a matter of swapping desks, and now start working what I called regular, routine, mundane murders, where there was something other than paramedic debris and casings left for evidence, like you see at a gang crime scene. And you had people that actually wanted to help and solve a murder as opposed to people that didn't want to talk to you. And that's what started my trek in murders. Worked there as an investigator for 21 years, then went on loan to the office of the sheriff for a while. Then I came back, and eventually I was promoted to sergeant and then promoted to lieutenant. And when I made lieutenant, they transferred me back into Homicide Bureau, no more loan for the sheriff. I went back and I spent the last 5 years of my career working at Sheriff's Homicide Bureau. Sunday night, it was March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. I get the phone call at home. They said, you've got a murder, respond to 8510 Village Lane. You have 1 dead, 1 injured, and your partner will meet you there. So I went there, and Dale Okazaki was living in a 2-bedroom condominium. Her roommate was Maria Hernandez. And as it turns out, we learned that Maria Hernandez had driven home, parked her car in the garage, got out of her car, walked up a carpet runner to the door that leads from the garage into the residence. Once she got to the door, she hit a light switch that was on the wall. And once you hit that light switch, it gives you 8 seconds from the time you hit it to the time the garage door closes, and it gets pitch black in there. And she hit the button. She hears a deliberate sound, and it appears that the suspect had hit the roof lining of a Dale Okazaki's car and went ahead to make that deliberate sound so she could turn around and look at him. And he came walking at her, point shoulder, 2-handed grip on a pistol, walked up, got within 18 inches of her. She put her hands up in front of her face, and he pulled the trigger. Immediately upon pulling the trigger, the lights went out. That was the 8 seconds. The lights went out. And speaking with Richard later on, much later on, he says that when he pulled that trigger, the impact, his ears were ringing, lights went out. He thought he was dead and he was in hell. And then he realized because Maria went down, she had unlocked the door already. He just opened the door, pushed her body aside, and went inside the condo itself. Maria, in the meantime, when she put her hands in front of her face, she had her keys in her hand. The bullet that came out of the gun that Richard had fired impacted the keys, went into her hand, and didn't exit. She now jumped up, hit the garage door, exited the garage door, and ran out through the alleyway, and in an eastbound direction. She ran there to about 4 condos down. Then there was a north and south running little street. She went around the corner because as she was running out of her condo, she heard a second gunshot from within the condo. And she ran around the front because she figured the suspect would come out the garage door the same way he went in. And when she got to the front, much to her surprise, Richard was just coming out the front door. And he was just as surprised to see her because he thought she was dead. She was surprised to see him because she thought he would be going out the back door, and he came out the front. They confronted each other by going around, playing a little cat and mouse around a Volkswagen Bug vehicle that was parked in front of the condo. She would go one way and he would go that way. She would then run back towards the other direction. He would follow her. And finally, she just put her hands up in front of her face, up in the air, and looked at him and said, "Please don't shoot me. You've already shot me once." And Richard at that time just put the gun by his side and walked away. He didn't run. He just walked away. And she went inside the house and found her roommate dead on the kitchen floor. She dialed 911 and law enforcement was called. The thing I remember most about that first murder were 2 things. Number one, there was a baseball cap that was on the garage floor. It was an AC/DC baseball cap, AC/DC being a rock musical group at the time. And one of their songs was Night Prowler. And if you would ask my wife, who's a very, let us say she's a religious lady, much more religious than I was at the time. And she said that group played nothing but devil worship music. And that wasn't so, but that was her memory of AC/DC. So I remember the baseball cap. And then I remember while conducting the crime scene investigation within the interior, the lights are on, it's silhouetted, so people on the outside could see right through because we're lit and they're standing in the dark. A deputy opened up the front door and said, "Gil, there's a lady out here who says she's Maria Hernandez's mother and she'd like to talk to you." And I said, "Okay, ask her if she can give me just a couple of more minutes. We're taking these last measurements and then I'll be more than happy to go outside and talk to her." And while the doorway's open, I hear a female voice saying, "Gilbert, is that you?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And she then responds, she says, "It's me, Pauline." I looked and I said, "Pumpkin?" Because I still couldn't see her. She was standing in the dark. And she goes, "Yes." And I couldn't believe it because Pumpkin was her nickname from the streets. And Pumpkin grew up 3 doors down from my house. Maria Hernandez was her daughter. And as it turned out, my parents actually baptized Maria when she was an infant. Since that time, Pauline had gotten divorced. She had moved away. I hadn't seen Maria since she was about 6 months old, and I hadn't seen Pauline since then. And Maria, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, was now around 25 years old. And so there is a connection that I had never had with any of my victims or any of my cases at all. And she was concerned. At that time, she really didn't believe that we would solve the case because she didn't believe, she was old school, and she thought that because Maria Hernandez was Hispanic and Dale Okazaki was Japanese, that the Caucasian, the Anglo cops wouldn't put that much work into it. And I assured her she was wrong, and we were going to work it. It would be work just as hard as any other case, and we were going to solve it. So we left that night. After doing that, Maria was at the hospital. We went and talked to Maria, and the next day we sent a staff artist out there just to go ahead and listen to her describe the suspect as he drew, and then he'd show her what he had drawn down on paper. And she said, well, little higher cheekbones, little hair. She'd describe whatever she wanted about his physicality. And ultimately, she said, that's him. That's the guy. So that was her description of the suspect. We went back. I took that drawing a couple of days later, and I'm at a local substation, and I'm showing it to detectives, which was the substation closest to where this happened at. And as I was showing it, there was a former member of that particular station, Rene Galindo, who is now working the crime lab, and part of his job was to do what was then referred to as an identikit. And it was clear acetates with lines on them, and you'd stack them up on top of each other, and you'd come up with a figure. And then you'd put that figure on a Xerox machine, you'd copy it, and you'd have what a suspect would look like by her description. He says, hold that thought. And he runs out to his car, and he comes back. He says, I just did this identikit for a 12-year-old little girl. And you put the two together side by side, and it looked like the same guy with the same general physical characteristics. He was tall, thin, light-skinned Hispanic or Caucasian, disheveled hair, stained brown gap teeth, and he had a pungent odor about him, wearing all black clothing. And so we went ahead and ran with that description, thought about it, but it was something so diverse. You know, you have a murder versus a child abduction, and he didn't get away with the child, so we just put that in the back of our mind. The next day I learned that there had been a murder that occurred 40 minutes after ours in the city that adjoined the city of Rosemead. This was in the city of Monterey Park. Crow's Flight, probably about a mile, maybe 2 miles away from where the first one occurred. Not even that far, but, you know, by driving streets, it adds to it. And there was the killing of one Silin Yu, where she was stopped and for some reason was drug out of the car, was shot and left in the street. Suspect got away. She was transported to the hospital where she was pronounced dead. And the city of Monterey Park, who works their own murders, initially they thought that it had been a boyfriend-girlfriend dispute. They had the people that called in from the neighborhood heard people arguing, shots fired, and then they thought, okay, this is a boyfriend-girlfriend dispute, and that's all we knew about it. We didn't feel that strongly about it being connected. It was just another murder in Los Angeles County. And as I stated, Monterey Park worked their own murder, so we didn't interact with them much. We continued to work our case the first few days, which was fine until the end of March. On March 29th, then we went on to the next murder, which was Vincent and Maxine Zazzara, and they were inside their residence. Somebody entered their residence in the hours of darkness and shot both of them. The difference being The husband was shot, contact wound to the left side of his head and left of center. And Mrs. Zazzara was, not only was she shot, she was stabbed. And he did a tremendous job, or almost a torturous job, of stabbing. He stabbed her in the abdominal area, going all the way down to her, down into her pubic area. Someone who was obviously in a fit of rage. There was a big T-cut underneath her left breast, and that cut was there. And I would later ask Richard, when we did interviews once he was in custody, what the purpose of the T-cut was. And he said he was trying to cut her heart out, but he couldn't get through. He forgot. The ribs protect the heart. So he didn't get through the ribs. He didn't cut her heart out. So therefore, he left her. But before he left, he removed both of her eyes. He cut her eyes out and left the residence. What he left at the residence in this case, in a planter outside the residence itself, he stepped in dirt. And in stepping with dirt, he left a shoe print. The shoe print later turned out, we discovered it to be the shoe print of an Avia model 440, size 11.5. And that shoe, doing further studies on it, I can tell you without equivocation today that there was 1,356 pair of model 440 Avias arrived in New York from Taiwan for distribution throughout the U.S. One pair of which ended up in the city of Los Angeles. 6 pair ended up in the state of California. 1 pair ended up in the city of Los Angeles. And they were different because these were black. They weren't white athletic shoes. They were black. We were able to find a shoe print. We also found a shoe print of another athletic shoe. We were able to match that one to Mr. Vincent Zazzara. And at that time, we knew that the second print was left by the suspect because there was a 5-gallon plastic can there that was used. He left a footprint on that as he stepped into a bathroom window to the residence, and that's how he had gained entry. Once again, we had no idea that that case was connected to anything, so another crew from Sheriff's Homicide Bureau was sent out to investigate that murder. And speaking with them, they had talked to the son of Mr. Zazzara, and he actually thought that it was the mafia, the Italian mafia, that had killed both of his parents. His mother was an attorney. His father was a business owner, had an Italian pizza restaurant just about a mile away from the house. And he thought it was bad business that got them both killed. And that was it for the month of March. We continued to investigate our case and couldn't come up with anything. We had 3 different cases, and we go into April. But as I was looking, we found another abduction, an abduction of a little girl in Los Angeles, city of Los Angeles, that was handled by the Los Angeles Police Department. This girl was a 10-year-old little girl that was abducted, taken to a construction site, and was sexually assaulted and released. That young lady, when he left her, he stepped in wet cement, and there was the Avia footprint once again showed up. So now we had an Avia footprint showing up at a murder scene because we spoke with the investigators from our office that handled that one. It was the same caliber gun that was used to kill Silent Yu, and we had a 12-year-old little girl that gave a physical description of her perpetrator, and now we had this 10-year-old girl that gave a physical description who was alive, and she had a shoe print involved in her case. I spoke with LAPD, and they initially gave a description, a physical description of someone that was 5'9" and a size 10 shoe. And there was a child abduction that had occurred in the city of Montebello of a 5-year-old girl off a bus bench. And I went to Montebello to try and find out a little more information about it. And their juvenile officer was reluctant to speak to me about it. And being in law enforcement, I wholeheartedly understand. You keep those cases just as we do murder cases. If there's a need to know, you tell them. If not, you don't talk about your case, because you never know in this world that we live in who's the suspect. And who am I going to pass information on to? Is that information ultimately going to get back into within earshot of the suspect who perpetrated the crime? So now I had a 5-year-old girl, a 10-year-old girl, a 12-year-old girl, and I had 2 murders with the same caliber. So early April, there was a meeting being held at the city of Monterey Park, and they're Monterey Park because they now had a child abduction of their own, a male. I believe he was 12 years old. He was kidnapped out of a residence in Monterey Park. So I had the boy kidnapped out of Monterey Park. I'm aware of the kidnapping out of the city of Los Angeles. I'm aware of the 5-year-old girl that had been kidnapped off the bus bench in Montebello, and I'm aware of the 12-year-old girl that was an attempted kidnapped out of the city of Pico Rivera. And they held a meeting in the city of Monterey Park to discuss these child abductions. I heard about the meeting that was going to go on, and they had a member of the FBI there. There was the purpose of the meeting was so they could discuss their cases, give all their investigative paperwork to this FBI agent, who would then forward them to headquarters of the Behavioral Science Unit in Quantico, Virginia, so they could come up with a profile and try and help the investigation along. Although uninvited, they allowed me to attend the meeting, and I sat there, and after they had discussed their child cases, I told them that I thought it was all related to the murders. And because I believe that I had created my own profile indicating that my suspect, obviously in my mind, had been rejected by women and would control children and would kill anybody that was an obstacle to get to his lust, which was the ladies. And they listened and they said, okay, good theory, but they didn't put much credence in it, and didn't realize that until months later in July, when my captain called up Quantico. We had received no word from the FBI as to their assistance or what they had formulated, the opinions they formulated with the reports, only to find out that the FBI investigator that was there at that particular meeting failed to send any of my paperwork to Quantico, Virginia for profiling because he did not think it was related. He thought it was far-fetched because to this time, criminal profiles are based on documented criminal history. And in no time in criminal history to this date has anybody done what Richard was doing. And so they had problems believing it, and by this time, he's killing with firearms. He's using knives. He's using his shod foot, blunt force trauma, manual strangulation, ligature strangulation. His victims range in age from 5 to 85. So nobody in criminal history had ever done this, and the public didn't know everything he was doing. And to this date, we've never released everything. As they say, the modus operandi, or the method of his operation, and there hasn't been a copycat to this date. So he was very unique, but there was enough physical evidence for me to see, to make some theories work, and I owe it all to a retired FBI agent by the name of Dr. Robert Morneau. In the early 80s, before I went to Homicide Bureau, I took two semesters of advanced criminal investigation pertaining to sex crimes. And upon doing so, Morneau gave us, the thing I had to learn was understanding. And you have to understand that everybody does something for a reason. Criminals do. I had to understand that Richard was doing something for a reason. You don't condone his actions, you just have to understand it. It makes it much easier for you to talk to him eventually and be able to reasonably work the case objectively. Well, in the case of Maria Hernandez, we had specifically gone over cases like that during the course of that I took at Cal State LA with Dr. Morneau. And he would say that when somebody points a gun at your head, male points a gun at your at your head. He's really, for the most part, doesn't intend to shoot you. He's really trying to see you scared. He's trying to see you frightened. It's a sexual crime. And he says that that is like foreplay for him, for the suspect anyway. And so once he sees you become frightened, that excites him, that turns him on. He likes the power. And in the case, if you go back to Maria Hernandez, he put the gun to her head, she cowered, she panicked, and then he shot her. The second time he encounters her, she throws her hands up in the air and she's no longer frightened. She just says, "Hey, you already shot me once, don't shoot me again." And which time he put the gun by his side and walked away. And so if you believe that, he argued, we eventually will learn that in Silent U, he was arguing, she's screaming at him, "Why are you following me? Why are you following me?" And he drags her out of the car and shoots her. Why did he not shoot her when she's seated inside the car? Why did he not do that? He drug her out a few feet and then finally just shot her in the street and left her. And so I'm seeing this, and that's what I was trying to get across to the FBI and to the people there, but it was hard to believe. And I understand it would be hard to believe when you stop to think about it. Nobody's ever done it before. And so I was being told that a lot of things were being said about me, and none of them were good. They were saying I was a young Hispanic punk trying to make a name for myself. Since I was relatively young in Homicide Bureau by Homicide Bureau standards. I got there March of 81, and this was now March of 85 that this is going on. So it was a little bit difficult to push my theory across. There were no murders during the month of April. We go into May, and he hits again in Monterey Park. He went to the house of William and Lillian Doy. And William and Lillian Doy, an Asian couple. And in the case of, if I can go back a second, in the case of the Zazzaras, Vincent Zazzara was asleep on the couch. Maxine Zazzara was asleep on a bed. Well, you go into the Doy residence, and they were sleeping in separate rooms. They were not sleeping together. Mrs. Doy had suffered, she had been the surviving victim of a stroke long before this ever occurred. And William Doy was asleep in his bedroom. William Doy is shot. In order to get this information out, some people, and I sit there and say, made a mistake. Their chief released the blood-curdling 911 call because news media want to hear it, people want to hear that, but you got to remember the suspect wants to hear everything that's going on about this thing. So he released the 911 call, and where Mr. Doy phones in and says, "We need help, been shot, please hurry." And when he gets that out, that was the last residence that Richard left the phones intact. He cut all phone lines from then moving forward, or disabled the phones. So we learned that. And when we got out there, again, as I stated earlier, that Monterey Park does their own criminal investigations, their own murder investigations, but they do contract through the sheriff's department for our crime labs. And our crime labs go out there and take prints, lift physical evidence. They're there at the request of the city of Monterey Park. I'm notified on the morning of May 14th. They advised me from my desk that the city of Monterey Park had called up and wanted me to respond to the Doy residence. They wanted me to take a look at it, see if it was related to anything that I'd been working. So I went out there and I was greeted by the lead investigator from Monterey Park, and he wanted to know what I was doing. And I told him that I was there at the request of my department, who had received a call from the city of Monterey Park asking me to respond and take a look at it. And he said, "Well, I'm the lead investigator, and I didn't ask for you." And I said, "Well, that's fine. I'll just leave. If I could just get your name so I have something to log that I was here and I did make contact with somebody, I'll get out of here. I won't even get inside." And he said, no, well, since you're here, come on, I'll take you inside. And so I went to the front door, and he said, "You can come on in." And I said, I want to look right here. So I'm on the outside looking in. I don't want to destroy any evidence, and I'm studying. And I put my hands behind my back, and I'm just looking, make sure I don't touch anything. And as I'm looking, I'm watching a uniformed officer that was inside the crime scene, inside the living room there. And there was a casing, an expended casing right there on the floor. And it was a small caliber, it was a 22 caliber casing. And I looked and I watched him step on it. And I watched him crimp it. And I asked the investigator, I said, "Excuse me, have you had all your evidence photographed yet?" And he said, "Yes." "Well, then might I offer you one suggestion? And that is, you might have our crime lab start picking up your evidence before anything else gets destroyed." Like that patrol cop right there just crimped a 22 that he's standing on. And certainly did not make him happy. He's embarrassed in front of me. I represent Big Brother. Monterey Park is a small department, and where at that time we had to have at least over 9,000 sworn members of the sheriff's department. Monterey Park probably had somewhere around 150 maximum at that time. And they considered us, their chief considered us, Big Brother didn't want us interfering with his cases. And so he just looked at me and said, "Why don't you go to the hospital and look at Mrs. Doy and see how she's doing, see if they can help you out at all." I knew he just wanted me out of his hair, just like my mother-in-law had told me to do something, and I didn't want to hear it. I'd be mad too, so I left and didn't hear much more. They weren't open about sharing information with us. We ultimately assigned one of our investigators to work alongside Monterey Park because he was friendly with them. He had been a reserve officer for the city of Monterey Park and still had friends over there before joining the sheriff's department full time. So we sent him over there, and then we get notified that on May the 29th now, the city of Monrovia, we handled their investigations, we handled their murders. We sent, when I say we, I mean Sheriff's Homicide. The way it works is somebody, whatever area we're going to, the patrol cops out there notify Sheriff's Homicide Bureau that they have a murder. Sheriff's Homicide Bureau then has a list. They know who's on call for the day. They call up and they send people out there to investigate the murders. Well, in this case, it was another team. They were up. Mike Robinson, Mike Bumcrot, they went out to Monrovia to the home of Florence Lang and Mabel Bell, two elderly sisters that were residing together. And they had been brutally sexually assaulted, and one was deceased at the location. The other had been transported to the hospital. And it was nothing more than blunt force trauma was used on these ladies, and they both slept in 4-poster beds, and they were taped or tied, one hand, one arm to each post, and one leg to each post. We found out there he was using, he actually used a hammer handle as a sexual object, and he left there and left him for dead. As I said, one of them died and one of them survived. The officers at that time, when they went out there, we had no idea what they had. They have to work their case for a while, and they consulted with us, and they said, "Hey, do you think it may be related?" We said, "Well, we don't know. If you have no physical evidence, we really can't say, since the surviving victim was not able to communicate well at all." And poor lady, no male could get close to her to talk to her because she would just go nuts. Psychologically now, she had the trauma of what happened, and she was up in age, so they couldn't talk to him anymore. And they didn't see any shoe print, but they did have an electric clock, a small electric alarm clock that Richard had stepped on, but all it did was left a partial print of something. We didn't know what it was, so we just said, keep on your investigation, keep working, and we'll tie it up if we have to. All right, so we send the investigators out there. We don't learn much about their case. It's just another murder, again, in LA County. At that time, we probably had close to 90 homicide investigators. Sheriff's Homicide consisted of those investigators that handled the entire county and it was just one central homicide bureau. Whereas a large department such as LAPD has homicide investigators at every station, but they also have what would be considered their main homicide. They're a smaller group it's called robbery homicide detail, and those guys handle the high-profile murders. Sheriff's Homicide, we handle whatever murder comes up, whether it's high-profile or low-profile, nobody cares about. When you're in rotation, whichever one, you get the luck of the draw, and that's the way it is. There was an attempt kidnapped out of Los Angeles Police Department, and it was an attempt kidnap of 2 little girls, and they were able to fight their way loose. The guy got away, and an LAPD motor officer saw someone run a red light, and so he went after him. He speeding, went after him, pulled him over, and he had lost sight of him just for a second when he went over a little hoop-de-loop, just getting over a little hill in the on-ramp of the freeway, and then he pulled over. And when he pulled over, motor officer went up, put him on the hood of his car, hands down on the hood of the car, patted him down, and then went back to his motorcycle because he was going to write him a ticket. Well, as he's going back to his motorcycle, he goes back and gets his sight book. Over his speaker, Richard hears, attention all cars, attempt kidnapping just occurred, suspect described, and to give the suspect description. And so Richard could hear it. Richard knows that's him. Richard will tell us that he drew a pentagram with his finger on the hood of the car and then bolted, ran. And he will tell us that motor officer never took a step in his direction. The motor officer will tell us that he ran after him, but he was too fast. He got away, out of sight. They hooked up the car. The car was a stolen vehicle. They didn't hold it for prints. They didn't do anything with it. They stuck it in the yard. Sun was hot, and it baked all the prints. By the time we got to it, everything had been baked off. But going through the car, evidence held there was a little plastic, like business card holder made out of cheap vinyl stuff. And in there was a business card for Richard Mena to a dentist. And so send somebody down to the dental office. The dentist is describing what was close enough to previous descriptions of our suspect. And so we decided it was a doctor in Chinatown, what is referred to as Chinatown, just north of downtown Los Angeles. I could see Chinatown from looking out my window, the 9th floor of the Hall of Justice. And so we took 2 Asian investigators and stuck them in there. And they were there just staked out, waiting for Richard to come in. Because I got a copy of the x-rays. I took them to a personal friend of mine that I'd grown up with that was now a dentist in the city of Pico Rivera. And I said, what can you tell me about these? And he looked at the x-rays. He said, well, he's got a bad abscess on his tooth. He says he's going to be in a lot of pain. He's got to be in a lot of pain. He's going to have to go back and get that taken care of. He says he'll be back. That's why we stuck 2 investigators in there waiting for him to come back. Well, these guys, the investigators, they didn't mind, man. They were making so much money. They were working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. All the stuff is overtime. They're getting rich. They're happy for sitting there. And finally, there was an executive on my department that intervened and said, we're wasting a lot of overtime money on those guys. Pull them out of there and put it in, it's LAPD's jurisdiction. Have LAPD sit on them. Have them put one of their robbery alarms in there. I said, okay. That was an order. So talked to LAPD. They put a robbery alarm in there. And we pulled our guys out. And all the dentist had to do was hit the button. That would send off a silent alarm to LAPD headquarters, which was just a mile away. And they'd get somebody over there really quick, Well, one night I get a phone call about 9 o'clock at night, and it's a dentist in his broken English telling me what happened. He pushed the alarm. Nobody came. He was in there that day. And it wasn't anything LAPD did. It was an inoperative alarm. It was just bad equipment. So we let everybody know, and just like a good executive would, okay, we'll stick our guys back in there then. Well, you ordered him out. He goes back. Okay, now that he's escaped again, put him back in there. And he never went back there again, but he did get away. And it was Richard. In fact, turned out it was Richard. So on May 30th, they have the rape and robbery of one Carol Kyle, who was a 42-year-old Caucasian lady that resided with her son, who was, he was about 12 years old at the time. And suspect gains entry, sexually assaults her, and uses handcuffs on her. On the Doi case, he used thumb cuffs. So she goes ahead, Carol Kyle, she was, according to Richard, and I'm not sexist, he said she was an attractive lady, and she was an attractive lady. And when he was done, he asked her if somebody would find her if she didn't go to work in the morning, and her response was yes. He asked her for directions to get back to the freeway. She assisted him. So what he did was he told her to put on a robe, and he took her into a bedroom, got the son in there, handcuffed them together, and then left them there. Allowed them both to live. She did whatever he wanted, and then he left. They were discovered, and so Burbank handles their own murders. But once again, sometimes they contract through other cities. They contract through the city of Los Angeles to do their staff drawings. They bring in an artist, and they do the same thing that we did on our murders with a staff artist. And so he drew something, and she had jewelry taken from her at that time. The jewelry that was taken, they reported it being stolen, but nobody had ever done anything with it. And we contacted her to get a little bit more information, and that's when we found out about the jewelry. So we advised her that we would send a staff artist out to her to draw the jewelry so we could then go ahead and get it out to pawn shops. And in doing so, she talked to our staff artist, a gentleman by the name of Malin Coleman, who was, when he spoke, was very slow, very deliberate, very calm. And she explained to him that the staff artist rendition she did of the suspect really didn't look that closely like the suspect. But the gentleman doing the artist rendition appeared to be in a hurry, and every time she wanted to make a change, he would take a deep breath like, oh, okay. And she really wasn't happy with it, and Malin advised her, he said, well, I got time, and I'm in no hurry. So that one was actually done on August 30th of 1985. And we got a hold of that drawing, and when you get that drawing and put it up to a photo of Richard, they look identical. It was a great drawing. Unfortunately, we didn't see it before then, and we didn't see it until after, and wish could have gotten it earlier. Would have helped us out immensely. So we then go from May 30th to June the 28th. And that was the house and Patty Elaine Higgins. And this 32-year-old teacher, she was sexually assaulted. She lived in a duplex, sexually assaulted, beaten, and her throat was cut from ear to ear, very, very deep, much further, and it had been decapitation. And We ended up later on, once we get to preliminary hearing, we dismissed that case in the interest of justice because that was the only case that was, we could not link with any physical evidence to any of the other cases. And the defense attorneys that were representing Richard decided that if they could get that case separated from the rest of them. Originally, we filed 14 murders, and they could get that one case, get it separated from the remaining 13, and they beat us in court on that one. Then that means that there was a possibility they could beat us on some of the others. They could cast doubt on the crimes themselves. Once we learned what they were going to do, the judge told the Deputy District Attorney, Mr. Phil Halpin, that he was inclined to allow their severance motion, and he would give it the following day. However, he instructed all attorneys involved in this thing that if he granted the severance, the attorneys had to be prepared to move on the remaining 13 cases starting right away. And everybody understood that that's what would be. And what the defense team never thought of, when they made the motion the following day to make it official on the record, we moved that we have the severance, and they were prepared to go on that particular case. And the judge had already indicated that he was leaning towards granting their motion. When asked what the people would say, representing the people, Deputy District Attorney Phil Halpin stood up and said, "Your Honor, people of the state of California moved to dismiss Patty Lane Higgins case in the interest of justice, and we are prepared to proceed on the remaining 13 cases. So rather than give them the opportunity to perhaps beat us or cast a shadow of doubt in our cases, that one was dismissed in the interest of justice." At which time the judge said, okay. The defense team, what could they say? They weren't getting it severed, they're getting it dismissed. So they granted the dismissal, and they said, well, Your Honor, we weren't prepared to start immediately, so I told you to be prepared. We will reconvene at 1:30 this afternoon and be prepared to call your first witness. So they were pushed into taking on that particular, at that time, during the trial, what was going to be perceived as the remaining 13 cases. So we in Homicide, on television today, there's a program called The First 48, and it's about investigators. It's the first 48 hours of any investigation where you have the highest potential of solving the case. You work hard, you continue to work around the clock, and you go. Well, my wife learned all the years working Homicide that if I get a murder, the first 48 hours are very, very important. A lot of times, maybe I wouldn't come home all night. We'd work through, and I've testified in taking a confession one time that I had been working 37 hours straight without getting any sleep before I took a confession, and they were trying to allege that I was tired, sleepy, and I was tired, but I was able to convince them and show them that I was mentally and prepared to take the confession. Everything was good legally, and of course, I was exhausted once we held the gentleman to answer. In that particular case, it's time for me to come home. It took me 3 stops, which normally I wouldn't stop at all, but 3 stops on a what would have been a 45-minute trip home. 3 stops to get coffee, just to get out of the car and walk, because I was so tired, so exhausted, but I was able to do it. So she knows that we work hard. So we had a murder on June the 28th of Patty Lane Higgins, and now July 2nd, this is actually the first murder. I take that back. The first murder that Frank Salerno and myself worked as a team was on June 28th, Patty Lane Higgins. And on July 2nd, the office called us up, notified us of a murder that occurred in the city of Arcadia. And Arcadia was where Patty Lane Higgins resided. The city of Arcadia is an incorporated city, but they contract not only through our crime lab, but they contract through us to use our homicide investigators. So we were there on the 28th of June. Now they're calling me up and saying, you've got one. Want you to go take a look at one the 2nd of July, which is just 4 days later. See if that one's related to the one you just went to in Arcadia. And if it is, take it. So we went out there to look, and there was no doubt in our minds that it was related. She had Mary Cannon, had her throat that was slit from ear to ear, just like Patty Lane Higgins. Blunt force trauma was used on hers. She had been ligatured. It looked like she had had her hands behind her back at one point in time as if handcuffed. And she'd been beaten with a milk glass lamp. And so we got there. And at this time, the FBI was indicating that serial killers, there were two forms of serial killers. They would either be organized or disorganized, and it's what they were calling them at that time. And we learned later that Richard was both organized and disorganized, and simply stated that an organized serial killer would go in with the tools of his trade. Whatever he was going to use to kill, he would have on his person. Disorganized would say go into a house and use whatever tools or items of opportunity they could use as a weapon from inside the residence. So he didn't have them with him when he went in, but he obtained something while once inside. Well, we found that Richard was both. In this case, we found the knife, which was part of a carving set, a carving knife with a carving sharpening rod. And we found the matching rod inside the kitchen, and that's what was used to kill Mary Cannon. We had also found, in the case of Patty Lane Higgins, with her throat slit, we could see on her neck that it was something with a serrated blade. And we found a small serrated blade knife. And back then they had commercials for a new Asian knife, I believe it was called a Ginsu knife, where it cut nails and pennies and cut everything. Well, that was in the sink in a container with a bunch of soapy water. It was clean. There was nothing on it of any evidentiary value other than it was the right size and it was serrated blade. And we figured that's what was used as a weapon there, although with a lack of physical evidence, we never could prove it. And as it turns out, we didn't file that particular case anyway. So now we know that July the 2nd, and when we're down there and conducting our crime scene investigation, one of the rooms, I could see they had new carpeting throughout the house. Mary Cannon lived by herself. She had new carpeting throughout the house, wall-to-wall carpeting, and you could see the footprints where he walked in and then walked out. And I got down on my hands and knees with a flashlight at an angle looking at this stuff, and it looked like I could see the Avia footprint, but I wasn't sure. And you had to you had to remain objective. You had to deal with your mind and not with your heart. So we cut that piece of carpet out, tacked it to a piece of plywood, had a unit from Arcadia race it, red lights and siren, down to the crime lab to get it photographed under proper lighting conditions. About 3 or 4 days later, we finally get the results of those photographs. And in fact, you could very easily see with oblique lighting used on it at an angle that it was the footprint left behind of an Avia shoe. We also found a piece of tissue paper or a napkin, white napkin, with a partial print of some form on there. And these partials were just as good, because when we'd assigned 2 investigators to do nothing more than to find out as much as they could about the shoe, find out where it was sold, who manufactured it, and they just said, where do we start? And I said, start at the LA County line. Just get out there and find it. They did some brilliant work, and they finally found the store that sold the shoes. That's when they learned that it was that of the Avia Model 440, contacted found out that a gentleman by the name of Jerry Stubblefield, who was the Oregon Ducks track and field coach, he held the patent on it. He was a designer and had the patent on the shoe. And so contacted him. Next thing you know, we come back with these distribution lists, everything about the shoe possible, and made for, when you start looking at this shoe print, it's almost like leaving a thumbprint around or a fingerprint, because with a fingerprint, you can narrow it down to one person, but with a shoe, you can't narrow it down to one person, but you can say that the likelihood of that one shoe print being at all these locations, being worn by more than one person, are not, the odds are not good, especially since it was a newer shoe. It wasn't a Reebok. It wasn't a Nike. It was just this new Avia shoe. So we found that to be the case on July 2nd. So we were out there with it was only 4 days from the previous murder, so we're starting to be a little tired. And we still have regular work to do. And on the 4th of July, we have what's called a PM desk. And we had to go in and sit at the desk and answer phones. And we had our whole homicide team in there. They would respond to murders. They would do whatever it took to get through that 8-hour shift. And then someone would come in and relieve us and we'd go home. We were off call. We wouldn't have to worry about it. Well, as it turns out, that evening, they had a murder in the jail. And so Frank Salerno, who was my regular homicide partner, he happened to be the acting lieutenant. So he had to go to the jail. He had to lead the crew over there. And he was taking other investigators with him to help so they could go ahead and help conduct interviews, because we were going to be interviewing quite a few inmates. And Frank just went ahead and said, "Gil, why don't you come out with us and help us do the interviews?" So I joined the crew and went to work and did inmate interviews, and which wasn't a lot of fun, but we did what we had to do, got the job done, went home. Got home about 3 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning. My phone rings, and he said, "Gil, we got another one for you guys." I said, "Okay." They gave me the information. And they said, "We're going to call Frank up." And I said, "Well, you better not. I'll call him up. Because Frank's the Italian stallion and he's not going to be too happy. We're running on empty and now you're giving us another murder." So I called him up, woke him up and said, "Frank, we got another one." And he's not happy. And I'm laughing because I knew I could predict this. I know he's angry and I'm laughing. He thinks I'm joking about this. I said, "Frank, I'm not joking. Come on, Frank." And I think I called him Frankie, and he hated being called Frankie. And I said, "Come on, Frankie, let's go. Got to go. It's work." And he exchanged some explicatives with me, made me understand that this better not be a joke. I said, "Well, you choose if you want to go or not. I'm going. I'm rolling. I'll see you there if you show up. If not, I'll catch up with you sometime." And there was a teenage girl, Whitney Bennett. She went ahead and she had been sexually assaulted and left for dead. And as it turns out, when we talked to Whitney later on, we get out there and we look, and she wasn't deceased. It's a very small city and very small police departments. They contract through us to do their murder investigations. But because this crime appeared to be so heinous and so serious, they asked us if we would go ahead and conduct it for them anyway, even if she didn't pass away. So we went ahead and we started, and the first thing we did was we called our crime lab out there to conduct the crime scene investigation for us, where the actual crime occurred in the bedroom. And we were out there about 12:30 in the afternoon, and we get notified by one of our criminalists, Giselle Lavigny. It was like watching the television show Dragnet. She's wearing her white lab coat. She has her hair in a bun. She's got her glasses and rubber gloves on. And she comes out there and she says, "Hey, fellas, got something to show you. I think it may be interesting to you." And we go inside, and there is a pink comforter. And on the pink comforter is a bloody Avia footprint. So the suspect in this case had stepped in blood and stepped on the comforter, and there it was, nice, big, and bold. I got chills on my arms, and I just said, kiss my ass. And Frank said, yeah, kiss your ass. And we walked out, and he called the captain immediately from a living room and said, we got us a serial killer, no doubt about it, because now we have the footprint showing up at several locations. And this is so close to where the other two had just occurred. And we thought we had a footprint at the Cannon residence. We weren't positive yet because we hadn't received the photographs yet. And now this is the early mornings of the 5th of July. That, remember, we only had a murder on 2nd of July, 3 days prior. So now we get this one. Whitney Bennett was very much alive. And she was a brilliant witness, great young lady. And she ended up with 42 inches of lacerations in her. She had fractured skull, fractured cheekbones, orbit bone, jaw, rib, and arm. And yet she was able to talk to us. And she had been out, she had recently made the move from where she used to live prior to the residence where she was assaulted. She lived with her dad and her stepmom. And she said she was very careful when she came home because she had a curfew. And she was watching all movement on the streets because she didn't want to be stopped by the cops for speeding. She was trying to get home because she knew she had a curfew. She said nobody followed her, and she made it home. She went inside, went into her room. She used to sleep with the light on, and her window was open, but the elevation of the residence was probably at least 8 feet above street level. So you couldn't drive by the street and look up. All you'd see is a lit bedroom window, but you wouldn't be able to see anything on the inside from the street. And so nobody had followed her, and yet somebody had gotten in the house. We later learned, talking to Richard, he just got out of the car he was in, was walking the streets, walked up there because of the light, could see her, and he decided, I'm going in. And at first he walked up to the front door and he tried the doorknob and it wasn't locked. And we talked to her father and stepmother, and another couple had been over there on the 4th of July. You could look out, sit out in the front yard and see the entire San Gabriel Valley below them. And they watched fireworks from all over the San Gabriel Valley going off. And then they went into their room and went to bed. And Richard went in the front door, turned the knob, and in his words, he said, voila, the door wasn't locked. He went in and he had a tire iron with him that night. He said he went to the bedroom, the master bedroom, but that door was locked. He figured that's where the parents were. He didn't do anything. He walked back, went to the front bedroom where he could see the light had been on, walked in there, saw Whitney in bed asleep, hit her over the head with a tire iron, assaulted her. He said she hit her so hard she went into convulsions, and it was like a shark food frenzy, he indicated. That he went ahead and hit her. She fell down on the floor, hit her again, tried to strangle her, and he left. He thought she was dead, and he left. There was no sexual assault. He just left the residence. And we could see the ligature mark around her neck, but she survived. We left there. Now we get to start a task force because now the captain has given us permission to go ahead and get anybody we want to work with us. And that was good. Now we're going to get people to believe us. And now whereas people even in my bureau were reluctant and hesitant to believe in me, although they weren't calling me names, they just didn't believe me. They thought I was wrong. Now Frank's saying, we got a serial killer. There's no doubt about it. Then we go to the 7th of July. We're going back to the city of Monterey Park. And Monterey Park, remember, they're the department that doesn't want Big Brother being involved, but we're called out to the residence of Sophie Dickman. And Sophie Dickman, who was also a Monterey Park resident, that one came in That one happened at 3:30 in the morning. And I remember it because that particular night, by this time, my family wasn't staying at home much. They were staying either with my in-laws or with my mom and sister at my mom's residence. And so I've told them, don't come home in the middle of the night. Don't come home late, because for the first time in my career, I'm sleeping with a gun on my nightstand. And this case is driving me nuts. And we're not getting enough sleep. We're working hard. And all I can think of is this case and what's going on and what do I have to do and what notes do I have. So all of a sudden I wake up and I'm perspiring. I'm breathing heavy. I'm nauseated. Subconsciously, I know he's in my house. So I can't call the local police agency, because the local police agency is the same agency that I work for. And if I call them and they come out and there's nobody here, they're going to think I'm crazy. And so I grab my gun and I walk room to room using good tactics, back up against the wall, gun in front of me, being as safe as I can, and I clear my house. Nobody's in here. It was just I was having a nightmare. I go back into my room, I get in bed, and I'm saying, what is this guy up to? And all of a sudden, 3:30 in the morning, and my phone rings in this complete silence, and it scared the bejesus out of me. I answer the phone, and it's my desk saying, Gil, you need to call up Linda Arthur. Linda Arthur was a good friend of mine. We used to double date her husband with George Arthur, who was a friend of mine. We'd gone through the academy together. And George had been murdered on June the 1st. So I don't know what's going on. So I call her up and she says, I think you ought to come out here. The lady across the street from me has just been raped. And I think it's part of what you're working. She worked our crime lab, so she had been out on some of the cases. So she knew what was going on. So I went out there, and when I get out there, I'm standing across the street, and I'm approached by a sergeant from the city of Monterey Park. And I won't tell you what he said, but he said, what are you doing here, with a few explicatives in there? And I said, well, good morning to you too, Sergeant. I said, I'm here visiting my friend, who happens to be the informant on your call, who happens to be a member of my department, and we're across the street, not in your crime scene. I'm just visiting with her. But now that I'm here, do you think when you're done with your crime scene, you'd allow me just to go take a look and see what you got? And he was standing next to a captain who was embarrassed by the way I was approached. And he said, come on, Gil, you don't have to wait. Let's go take a look now. So we went to the residence of Sophie Dickman, and I believe Sophie Dickman was about 65 years old at the time. She was a spry old lady. I shouldn't say old, but she was a spry senior lady who had worked psychiatric ward of the Los Angeles County General Hospital. So she had been through all kinds of stuff. And she had been sexually assaulted. And like a good homicide cop or a good nurse, when anything happened, the first thing she did was look at her watch. And when I woke up and I got back in bed, the first thing I did was look at my clock, and it was 3:30 in the morning. At 3:30 in the morning, Richard was raping her. And she knew, because she had looked at her clock, because she kept track of time. And he sodomized her and said that had he done it the proper way, it probably wouldn't have hurt as bad. And he left her handcuffed to a poster bed. She dragged the bed to the window and started yelling out for Mrs. Arthur, who lived right across the street from her. And she knew that my friend Linda was a cop. And so Linda had another couple staying down her house, keeping her company due to the recent death of her husband. And he was a cop, and his wife, although she wasn't a cop, Linda and George had baptized their child. They were just good friends. And they went out and found out that Sophie had been raped. She called Monterey Park Police Department, and that's what got everybody rolling, and that's how we found out about the case. He had made entry on that through a cat door that you'd put between your slider to come in the back door, and he just ripped it right out of the tracks, went inside, ransacked the house. I had found out that after George had passed away, somebody had attempted entry into Linda's house, and she heard noise at the front door. She got up, she was by herself, and she could see a tall, thin man wearing a baseball type cap, but it was the kind that had flaps on the back of it, had a flap on the back of it. And she had her gun in her hand, and she says, "What are you doing? What do you want?" At which time he just turned and walked away. And so I'm wondering, when Linda called, and I didn't wake up Frank on this particular occasion because we were both bone tired. We had already decided that we were not going to meet until 12 noon on the 7th. We needed to get a little sleep. And so Linda was my friend, my very close personal friend. And so I figured I'll go check it out because I don't know if she's traumatized, still from her husband's death, or psychologically she wound up in this thing. I didn't know, so I'd go check it out. Well, as it turned out, we didn't know for sure, but we had a good inclination that it was part of what was going on, just by the matter. He didn't kill her, but he did say the same verbiage, and that was, while inside some of these places and he allowed the victims to survive, it was, "Where's the money, where's the jewelry, and shut up, bitch," were his three favorite phrases. And he had used those in this case, and he left her. So we're out there, we're looking, we look, we're done. It's now 7 a.m. I call up my wife and said, "Hey, maybe we can go out for breakfast this morning. Just get the kids." And she said, "Kids are still asleep." I said, "I know they're still asleep, but maybe you could wake them up and invite your mom and dad, and we'll go out to breakfast." So they thought it was a good idea, so we went out to breakfast. Came back from breakfast, and I told my wife, I said, "Listen, I'm going to get an hour's sleep. Wake me up in an hour, please." And she looked at me and said, "You can't keep going like this, Gil. You're going to end up dead. You're killing yourself." And I said, "I've got to keep going. You're either going to wake me up or I'll call the office. They'll wake me up." And I had one shoe off already, and I didn't have to take the other one off because it was the office. They found me, and they said, "We got another murder in Monterey Park. Go back to Monterey Park." So I went back to Monterey Park, and that was the home of Joyce Nelson. And Joyce Nelson had been beat. She had been stomped. There was a footprint right on the side of her head. And more importantly, going into the residence, there was a footprint, a nice big Avia footprint, right on the front porch. Her porch had been painted red, and there was a nice big Avia footprint. So now we have all these cases being tied together. There is the footprint there in Joyce Nelson's house, and Monterey Park can no longer refrain from admitting that their cases are part of what we're working on. So we went ahead and left there on July 7th. On July 20th, since we're just going and going and going, I'm contacted by Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, Scott Carrier. He went ahead and told me that they had been out on 2 cases the night before, and those cases, understanding the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office is a centralized office, so all murders are handled and investigated. They have the ultimate responsibility for finding and determining the cause of death in each death. And so I was called, and Scott Carrier said, "Gil, I was out on a couple of cases yesterday, and God, it sure sounds like what you're working on." And he told me about one case in Glendale, and that was the Needing case. It was 2 people. It was Maxon and Leila Needing. Again, an elderly couple, and someone had made forced entry into their residence, shot them both, and then cut them with a sharp object at the coroner's office. Dr. Golden said that it appeared that it was made with a sharp, heavy object. Richard will tell an author later on that he used a machete on them. The attempt was made in the coroner's office to duplicate it with a scalpel. You just couldn't duplicate it. It was so big. And they were also, both of them had gunshot wounds to the head. And they were discovered a little later on that day because a daughter for one of the daughter of the needy family, who was an adult, missed her mother and father at church on this Sunday morning. So she went to check on them, find out why they hadn't gone. And she's the one that discovered both bodies inside the residence. And he also told us, Scott Carrier did from the coroner's office, told us that on the same night, they had another murder out in Sun Valley, which is on the northwest side of Los Angeles County. And that was Samkid and Chamarang Kovanath. They were, the husband was shot. He was sleeping in the bed. She was sleeping on the couch. And he was shot. She was not. She was raped and taken into the room where her husband lay deceased. And Richard had actually turned his head and then sexually assaulted the surviving victim, and did it in such a manner so as to make it look as if he was watching, the husband was watching the rape being constituted. Richard then left, and when the cops were called, they found the surviving wife. Before he left, the wife took him out to the garage because they owned a jewelry business and gave him some jewelry that was inside one of their vehicles. They did that. He left, and when the cops got there, they found this. She had a young boy, about 10 years old. They found him nude and hands tied behind his back, and baby oil around him. So he had sexually assaulted the little boy, killed the husband, raped the wife, and on that case, right there on the step in the front and again on the back was an Avia shoe print. So now we have a case where we have a shoe print, a gun, rape, a murder, and pedophilia. And so all those doubters that said one man isn't capable of doing everything, he did it all in one house one night. And there was removed all doubt from anybody. So the next murder occurred on August the 6th. But by this time, about August the 1st, my captain calls back to Quantico, Virginia, said, hey, you guys are promising all this assistance and everything else. How come my investigators never got back any word from your investigators as to what they thought of our case? And that's when it was learned that the investigator that attended the meeting back in April had determined that he didn't believe that my case was related to anything they were working on. Therefore, it had never been sent. They knew nothing about my case. So within 2 days, they had sent a team of 4 investigators from Quantico down here to look at it. And while they were here, we had our meeting at LAPD with joint agencies back there on August the 6th. And while we're there, we learned that Christopher and Virginia Peterson had both been shot out in the Northridge area of Los Angeles County, which is also on the northwest side of town. And they had both survived. Both had been shot in the head. Fortunately for them, the ammunition that was used was .22 caliber, but it was 22 caliber reload. So somebody had reloaded them, and it was old. So they didn't pack much punch, and they didn't hit any vital organs. She was shot in the nose, and it went around, skirted, didn't break any bones, and the bullet ended up lodging the back of her neck. Christopher ended up getting shot at the back of the head, but it did no damage to the brain or the structure or anything else. Christopher jumped up because he had a little girl asleep in the bedroom. He jumped up to go save his little girl, at which time Richard ran out of the house. And my partner, Salerno, was quoted in the paper saying that he felt that Richard was a coward because when confronted by Mr. Peterson, he ran. Well, he actually wasn't confronted. He thought he was being confronted, but all Mr. Peterson was doing was running to try to save his daughter. And I advised my partner, I said, I'm just letting you know, if I shoot somebody in the head and they want to get up and come after me, I said, I'm going to run too. I said, what are these dukes going to do that a bullet couldn't do? And so Richard ran. The first time we interviewed Richard, Richard brought that up. He said, hey, what's up with your partner, Salerno? How come he's bad-mouthing me like that? And I advised Richard the same thing. I said, I told him it was a mistake. I didn't think you were a coward. I'd have gotten out of there too. You got a live witness and somebody that withstood a gunshot wound to the head. Feet don't fail me now. They then drove themselves to the hospital, and LAPD continued with that case. I know it was on the 6th because we had a meeting. We had this joint task force meeting with the FBI where everybody discussed their cases. But he left a footprint there, but it wasn't Via. It was, we learned later, it was Arcadia, and it had little tiny dots, concentric circles, all through the sole pattern. So we said, okay. There was nothing we could do, and we leave August the 8th. We had a murder and diamond bar. I'm at home. They wake me up in the middle of the night, 4 o'clock in the morning, and they tell me you got a murder and diamond bar. My wife wakes up and she says, where are you going this time? I said, diamond bar. Diamond bar adjoins the city that I live in. And she said, don't mess around. And I've been known to joke around. I've been known to lie. And I said, I'm not joking around. And I went in and I showered and shaved and got ready to get dressed and go to my murder scene. And she said, I'm serious. Where's it at? And I said, I told you it's in Diamond Bar. And I showed her the address that I wrote down. And back then we didn't have GPS. We had a map book called Thomas Guides. So I showed her in the Thomas Guide exactly where it was. And I very calmly told her, I said, well, now that you're fully awake, go back to sleep. But then, a little while, wake up and go to the market and buy some stuff for cold cuts. And about 2 or 3 this afternoon, I'll bring about 15 people over here and we'll have some lunch right here at the house. And she just responded, the very kind religious lady that she is, said, bullshit. I'm leaving and I'm not coming back till this thing is over with. And so my eldest daughter, who was 13 at the time, said, Mom, you want me to get my brother and sister up? She said, yes, get them up right now. And tell them they don't have to change. They can go in their pajamas. And she said, you're not leaving until I get out of the house, Gil. So she got the kids. She threw clothes in bags for them, and they left the residence. And I went out to Diamond Bar where we conducted the murder out there. That was Sakina Abawath out there. And as it turns out, she was a medical doctor in her country. And she was a Shiite Muslim. And so she was also sexually assaulted. Her husband was murdered. And the little boy that she had, he was about 4 years old. He was just told by the mother later on, go to the neighbor's house, ask for help. And it was the neighbors that discovered Mrs. Abawath. During this time, and since it wasn't my case, I don't remember the exact times, but it was sometime in July, get notified somebody's listened to the world news, some kind of news, and they listen to something about Mr. Peter Pan has been killed, his wife up in San Francisco, and looked like the same gun and same type of entries. And so we decided maybe we ought to go up there. So we're going up there right now. And I call the wife and I tell her we're do me a favor. How about grabbing the kids and go meet me at the house? And if you get there before I do, why don't you just pack a few things for me? Just give me a couple of days worth of fresh clothes, and I'll see you there. She said, where are you going? I said, I'll tell you when I get there. Right now, you just don't tell anybody anything. Just go take the kids so I can see them and meet me at the house. And so we went to the house. She said, where are you going? I said, okay, we're going to San Francisco, but I don't want you talking about to anybody. I don't know where in San Francisco, but when I get there and I'm bedded down, I'll call you up and let you know how to get in touch with me, where I'm at and what's going on. But please, just keep it to yourself. So I called her up that night, and she said, some kind of detective you are. And I said, what are you talking about? She says, well, you said don't tell anybody. Shortly after you left, NBC put it on the television. Los Angeles detectives headed to San Francisco following up on serial murder case. Film at 11. And I said, yeah, I don't know. Somebody told them. Don't know who. They ratted us out. And matter of fact, Laurel Erickson was on the same plane as we were. And so we rode up there together. She saw us at the airport and said, what can you tell us? I said, can't tell you anything. We're in San Francisco. San Francisco's case, not ours. So it was the second story of a condominium or an apartment. Walked upstairs. I'm met there by a ABC reporter who I knew personally. And he says, Gil, what can you tell us about going on? I said, can't talk to you. It was Henry Alfaro. And he was staked out like a good cop waiting for us to get there. And I said, Henry, I can't talk to you. We're in San Francisco. You get anything, come to San Francisco. And he understood the way it worked. So he said, okay, thanks anyway. We go up there. I'm carved into the closet door is a pentagram. And on one of the closet doors, it was a sliding door, there was a carving in the closet door that said, Jack the Knife. And I had no idea what that meant. And I'll learn later on when talking to Richard, Jack the Knife was just another name they gave Jack the Ripper. And Richard, as it turns out, was a student of serial killers. He knew everything about serial killers. He said he had an ego that would fill any room. And he could tell us anything about serial killers from the time the Romans fed the Christians to the lions to the modern day serial killer. And as it turned out, him and Ted Bundy used to communicate via U.S. Postal Service back and forth with each other until Ted Bundy met his demise. We were notified of an Orange County case. We went down there. We never went inside, never looked around. We waited for him. We spoke with him outside. And what had happened was a kid had working on a brand new bike that he just received. And he's working on it out in his garage. And this car goes by driving awfully slow. And he looked at him and he noticed him. And he said, well, that's a little strange for this area. It's a nice area. And he stays out there. And a while later, that same car comes driving by awfully slow again and actually looks at the kid, sees him. Well, the kid was smart enough to write down the license plate number of the car. And that was a case in Orange County where he raped the lady. She survived, shot the man, but he survived. He was actually brain dead for a bit, but he survived. He was straight-lined, and they brought him back, and he got away. They found the car. It was dumped in downtown L.A. It was dumped, and we put a surveillance team on it. But again, this executive said, hook it up. You know, we figured he left it there. He'll come back to it to use it again. And it wasn't hooked up, but it was used on Orange County case. So they're the ones that actually came up and picked the car up, took it down to them. Because of their work, they had a laser reader. You could use a laser to find fingerprints. And they were able to find a thumbprint, I believe, where he had adjusted the mirror on a vehicle. Now, that's what I was told. They found it on the mirror as he adjusted, and that's what I was advised. I spoke a few years ago, and there was a lady present, and she said, you know, my friend who works at Crime Lab, and she was there. She says, it didn't come off the print. It didn't come off the thumb or off the rearview mirror. It came off the driver's window. And that's where I lifted it off. And I said, okay, but I have no idea whether it was true or not true. We were advised that it was the adjustment on the mirror. What I do know is because they used a laser and it came out on the news, we told our sheriff, they've got laser equipment down there. Within a week, we had 2 lasers for our office. So it worked out good. So now we're working. We have a 40-man crew working this clues. Every time the news goes on, the phones light up at the Homicide Bureau. There are clues coming in by the hundreds every time, every news broadcast something comes on. We had 40 people up there just doing nothing but following clues up throughout the county, and we did what we could to stay up with them. We one of the clues, and they put up a $50,000 reward, I believe it was, and we got a phone call from daughter of one individual, and she said, my dad knows who you're looking for. He's a friend of his, and he smokes dope with him. And she knew exactly who he was, and he'd be a good witness. So we had him picked up, brought him in, and he gave us a name of Ramirez. And he was also from El Paso, which is where Ramirez was. And so when he gave us the name of Ramirez, it was then sent to DOJ. Well, I take that back. He gave us the name of Richard Despeinado or Ricky. And Despeinado in Spanish means the uncombed one. And then we found out about this time that San Francisco, with their murders, we've been in touch with them. Now they've got somebody that have gotten some jewelry and pawned it. And so the pawn shop got in touch with them up there. And it was jewelry that was taken out of some of our cases. So San Francisco found a friend of his up there and got that friend and told him they knew all about Richard, and they got the name of Ramirez from him. Rodriguez, I forget what his first name was, but they got it out of him. He gave them the name Ramirez. At that time, during the mid-'80s, fingerprints weren't automated. All fingerprints weren't automated. The only ones that were automated at that time were felony convictions. So he didn't show up with any prints in felony convictions. We had an informant out here that told us that he had been arrested by Los Angeles Police Department the year before for grand theft auto. And we told them to hand search all misdemeanor convictions, and they searched it, and they found 8 Richard Ramirez's. And they found 1 print that made positive for Richard because they had lifted a print off a case in Mission Viejo, which wasn't ours. And they matched against them, so then we knew that that vehicle that was used in the case in Mission Viejo matched the fingerprint that was on file for the misdemeanor conviction of Richard Ramirez. We got a picture, showed it to the informant. The informant said, that's him. So on August 30th, we positively identified Richard Ramirez as being the Night Stalker. And that night, Friday night, August 30th, his photograph and name was released publicly on the news media. And what we didn't know, we had an operation. We knew that he liked to buy drugs down in the downtown Skid Row area, which is where he was residing. And he used to hang around the Greyhound bus station that was down there in LA. And so we had a special team from Los Angeles Police Department conducting surveillance, waiting for him to come into the bus depot where the passengers all come in. And as it turns out, we learned later that Richard was actually stopped and cited on the Wednesday, which would have been the 28th of August, cited for operating a motorcycle without a proper license. And he left, and he was headed for Arizona to go visit his brother in Phoenix. On his way down there, the motorcycle broke down. He had a trucker stop to help him out, and he told the trucker, I'll give you the bike if you just give me a ride into Phoenix. And took him like a hitchhiker, dropped him off. Richard stood there, couldn't find his brother, so on Friday, he gets on a Greyhound bus, and he comes back. He comes back into town, and when he gets back into town, when he exits the bus, which comes in the back way, and he goes inside the terminal, he looks in the terminal, he sees too many people there that don't belong. And the informant told us that he would recognize any cops that were in there because cops, although they can look dirty, they don't smell dirty. Their teeth aren't rotten. Their hair is not that dirty. So he'd make them right away. He knew there'd be trouble. So he did. He went ahead and he walked out the same way that he entered, and that is from the bus side, not the front doors. Walked out, walked around the streets, went to a nearby liquor store, looked at the newspaper in the rack and saw his picture on the front page. He knew he had been made, identified. He then got on the local bus, transporting him through the city transportation. And if he made it just 8 miles east of downtown Los Angeles, he had another brother that lived there in East LA. And he got on the bus. Unfortunately for Richard, he was made probably 2 miles outside the downtown area. As a passenger on the bus, one of the other passengers saw him and pulled the cord to get off the bus. Next stop, the bus was at a red light. That passenger got off. Richard saw him going right to the phone booth and started dialing. Cops keeping an eye on the bus as it left. The bus took off. That passenger that made the 911 call then flagged down a gas company pickup truck with a driver in it and said, follow that bus, the killer's on that bus. And they did. About a mile down the road, Richard got off the bus because he knew he had been made. He exited the bus, and then he started running. He ran probably a good 2 miles, jumping fences. He went over the 10-foot sound walls of the 5 freeway across all 10 lanes of the 5 freeway, now running in a northeasterly direction, trying to get away. He then crosses the city line separates Los Angeles City to Los Angeles County, which is nothing more than center dividing line, and he gets into the county and tries carjacking one car, doesn't make it, tries carjacking a second car. A lady victim screams. Her husband hears the noise, grabs a piece of metal, a pipe, runs out there and hits Richard in the head, and the fight is on. He hits him a couple of times. Richard's exhausted from the jaunt he's been on and starts running away. The neighbors, who have heard all the commotion, seen their neighbor in a fight, heard the lady screaming, see the guy running away. They go after him. Richard only lasted about 4 houses before he just gives up. He's tired, he's dead, and they just encircle him. 911 was called. Unfortunately, at that time, the locals that encircled him didn't know who he was. They had no idea that he was a Night Stalker. And first cop got there from the sheriff's department. He didn't know who he was. He just knew he was a rookie, and he knew he had a radio call of a citizen holding a felony suspect. So he gets out there and he sees Richard bleeding profusely from the head. So he handcuffs him, calls for paramedics. Paramedics come by and they bandage him up, look like a turban on his head. And then he stuck him in the backseat of his car as he's gathering a very easy arrest because he didn't have to do anything other than just take statements and now take him to jail.
Yeah, we will. What have you been arrested for? You ever been arrested before?
Danny, where's your car?
Never been arrested before in LA? Sit up. How long ago?
Let's get all these.
What's your name?
Huh?
What's your name?
11. Back up on the sidewalk, folks, please. Go back.
And while he's there, LAPD, who had been following 911 calls across from their city as he ran easterly direction through their city till he got to the county, drove up in mass And one guy said, yep, that's the guy we've been chasing. Get him. So they took him right out of the deputy's car, put him in their car, and drove him off to Hollenbach Station, which is LAPD's venue. And that was their area, at which time I was notified that he was in custody. And the rest is history. He was arrested. The city was happy. People, you'd have thought that there's a great big celebration going on out there. There was a block party right around Hollenbach Station where he was being detained until we got him transported over to Men's Central Jail, where he was booked in at the inmate reception center and awaited the rest of the criminal proceedings. Ultimately convicted and sentenced to death 13 times, and I don't know how many years he got for all the rest of the stuff. There was nothing unusual about him. He was just a man. I tell everybody he was nothing more than human. And we sat there. I watched characteristics of him. My partner, as soon as we walked in, the first thing he did was advise him of his constitutional rights. And Richard invoked. He wanted an attorney. So we had all bets are off then. So, okay, well, we'll leave. He said, well, Wiener, I have some questions. And we're not questioning him. He questioned that. Well, you've already said you want an attorney. So, yeah, but can you answer me what's going to happen here and what's going to do this? And so we sat down with him again. We started talking. And we conducted an interview with him. Although he had been admonished of his constitutional rights, we did not violate any laws whatsoever. Constitutionally, it says what you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. And we can't use it if he doesn't waive his rights. But what people don't understand is unless if he were to take the stand in trial, anything he said, we could use what he gave us in the beginning as rebuttal, but we couldn't take anything out of that interview with him and use it to enhance our case. Because then if he told us, well, I threw the gun in this yard, here's the address where it's at, and we went and retrieved it, we would not be able to use that gun because that's what's called fruit of the poison tree. So anything off that poison tree, which would have been a statement made after he had invoked his rights, is poison, so we cannot use it, and it cannot be used against him. People don't understand the law, but that's the way the law is. Matter of fact, during preliminary hearing, the judge, and I won't mention his name, but his initials were Peter Smith, he said that it was the worst violation of Miranda that he had ever heard of. And he just didn't get the full strength of it because we never used anything that was taken in that against him. And that's all Miranda is. We can't use anything taken against him. So he was wrong. We didn't violate his rights. The only violation would have been had we used something taken out of that interview, and we didn't. On the very day he was arrested, we had two investigators headed down to Tijuana, Mexico, which is the border town in San Diego, because from the informant that ran around with him from El Paso, he advised us that he had a girlfriend down in TJ that he had taken some of the stolen property down. So we actually recovered a gun and some jewelry down there. We recovered a radio down there, and the radio was matched with serial numbers from one that was taken out of the Mabel Bell Florence Lang residence. So it proved good, but we never used anything that was taken out of that interview. And Richard, when he talked to us, would talk to us in the third person. Well, no, Richard, the Night Stalker may have done this, or might have wanted to do this, or may have done that, but it was never him. It was always the Night Stalker, and he was not admitted to be the Night Stalker. But none of it was used against him anyway. The case, we had worked so hard at, everything documented, all that stuff we had before we talked to him. He strengthened some stuff, okay, we were right here, we were right there. He, post-conviction, we spent a few days with him after conviction and sentencing. And he told us we made a mistake. Frank testified in the Whitney Bennett case. He did the crime scene testimony on that one. And he said that Richard had gone in through a bedroom window because the window screen was removed. And Richard told us, he said, "You're wrong. I went in the front door. I went out the window, but I went in the front door." He called Frank, he called him Mr. Salerno. He called me Gil. I called him Rich. And we got along. When I asked him I said, hey, what's up? You call him Mr. Salerno and I get called Gil? I said, what's up with that? He said, yeah, but that's Mr. Salerno. He knew, since he was well read on serial killers, he knew all about Frank working on the Hillside Strangler. And he was awestruck with him. That was like a hero to him. And he got excited. So he was, other than that, he was more articulate, far more articulate than any other murder suspect I ever interviewed. To include any ethnicity or anyone. He was well-read, self-taught, but he was articulate. But post-conviction, we sat down with him. Matter of fact, he was in trouble in the jail, and they had him, if anything, on lockdown. It wasn't lockdown. They just took away any privileges that he had. And no visits for a while, and he couldn't watch the TV, couldn't do this. Well, they had a movie that was Sunday night at the movies that was made for television about the Night Stalker case. And we went in there and we took the video and we set it up. We were going to watch it with him. And we just had good conversation. We knew in order to go ahead and get information we wanted out of him, you got to treat him right and you got to be able to communicate with him, because if you turn him off and you can't communicate, you get nothing. And it's not that I was going to take this guy out to dinner. I knew my job. And when I was talking to him, the first day we interviewed him, for a millisecond, I became frightened. I became concerned because I'm interviewing him and he's listening to me. But now and in my methods and my expertise of interviewing, I like to take people, check their anxiety levels. So I take them up, get them high, and then bring them back down because I want to see where I'm going to send my questions to. I want to keep them mid-range, and I don't want to get him upset because I want him to talk to me. While I was learning about Richard, I talked about Richard and his family life, and I talked about his sister and relationship with his father. And when it started getting too sensitive, Richard had his head down on the table and had his fists on the table. His arm was there and his head was sideways, and he started breathing heavy, almost to the point of hyperventilation. And as I was talking to him, I thought I really had him going. I thought I was getting ready to get him to confess to something. And he's going, and then it started concerning me. My partner was hitting me underneath the table with his leg, and I didn't know if he was telling me to back off or to keep going because I had him going and he was going to cop out. And I don't know what's going on, and I'm watching him and I'm watching his breathing, and all of a sudden for a millisecond, I'm thinking, if this guy starts to levitate, I'm out of here. Because I've been shot at, I've been stabbed, I've been in fights, but I ain't sticking around to fight somebody that's floating around a room. And I said, hey, Rich, you hungry? And immediately he calmed down. Immediately he says, yeah. And I said, okay, we'll get you something to eat. We'll take a break. And calmed him down and got some food sent into him. We went outside. My partner said, why did you quit, man? You had him going. I said, I didn't know what you meant. We hadn't talked about this under this nonverbal communication between you and I. And I really didn't know. And I didn't want to quit. I didn't want to keep going and have you get mad at me later on saying why I was trying to tell you to stop. Where if I stopped and you were telling me to keep going, I felt confident enough by this time, I could take him back up anywhere I wanted. And as it turns out, he ate, he got comfortable, and we just ended the conversation. We didn't deal with it anymore. Well, after the fact, after conviction, when we're talking with him, and we become somewhat friendly, and he's relaxed more, and he's telling me, we're asking about some of the things and how things went out on the news, and he was saying that he threw the gun and the shoes over the Golden Gate Bridge when Mayor Feinstein made her public statements about what was going on. She released evidence that wasn't made for the public. And it was nauseating to see her do it. It upset us to no end. It was hard to get any regular words to come out of my mouth other than profanities. I was not a big fan of the mayor of San Francisco at that time. So she put it out, and he told us what he did with them. Funny, because his ego says, I asked him what happened to the eyes, and he wouldn't give it up. He wouldn't give up the eyes, and he wouldn't give up any information that we didn't have. He wanted, for the most part, if he had information that we didn't, he thought that he outsmarted us. And so it went straight to his ego. He enjoyed it. The only thing he asked for was, he asked if we could fly him back and not send him back in a bus. And so I said, that can happen, and we'll escort you up there. And we had good communication going, so I felt comfortable. Then I told Frank later, I said, nah, we better not. I don't want to do it. And he said, why not? I said, because, if this guy starts getting squirrely and starts fighting up on the plane, we're going to have to shoot him. And if we shoot him, the first thing people are going to say is, well, why are the homicide investigators flying with him instead of regular transportation deputies? And so we just decided, let's just let transportation take him up there. And they put him on a plane to get him up there. And I wish I could have gone, because down here, he was he had his fan base down in Los Angeles County. He was big man on campus down in Los Angeles County. And he used to walk around with his chest stuck out and proudly strut his stuff. And one of the last statements he made to the news media is he was being taken out of court, final day of sentencing. And he said, so what? Where you going? He said, I'm going to Disneyland. He says, this was always in the cards. I knew what was coming. He made some statement about him going to Disneyland, which is what you see all the big stars do with the athletes after, what's your next trip? That was on a commercial.
A big deal. Death always went with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland.
He went up there, and the pilot told me later, who was a personal friend of mine, we had gone through the academy together, and John Bickel said, boy, you should have seen him when he went in there. He says, two of the biggest, buffest guards. He came into the room, and he said, all right, get naked, get stripped now. This ain't L.A., this ain't Disneyland, this is San Quentin. Get it done now. He says Richard's eyes were as big as silver dollars. He was scared. Whymper just did everything they said. They knew he was nobody special up there. He was nothing more than a number to them. And but he went up there, and we didn't talk to him anymore. Down here, anyway.
What are you up to now these days?
Well, ever since Netflix documentary went out, I remember talking with the director, a brilliant man, Tiller Russell. And Tiller Russell, once we consummated the deal by a handshake, he said, okay, let me tell you how I want to write it and how I want to go about this. And I just advised him. I said, I don't need to know. You're the professionals. I'm just the talking head. You do what you got to do. This is your business, not mine. And he said, okay, well, we'll do that. And then when we're done filming, we get to the editing portion, we'll call you in so you can see what's going to. I said, I don't need to do that either. Again, you're the professionals. You cut and edit the way you want. And I'll watch it when it comes out. All you got to do is call me up and let me know it's dropping. So he did. He called me up, said it's dropping tonight, midnight. The wife and I stood up, and he just said, it's dropping tonight at midnight. Enjoy the ride. And I said, what do you mean enjoy the ride? And he said, well, it's just enjoy the ride. I'll talk to you in about a week. And so the wife and I stood up. We watched it. We binge watched it that night. In watching it, it made me cry. It made me laugh. I thought it was a well-done documentary. I was very happy. It was extremely accurate. And the only discrepancy that I found personally on my part was it indicated, and it could have been done in editing, and it could have been my mistake. I indicated that October 1st, 1971, I was assigned to East Los Angeles Station, and that wasn't the case. October 1st, 1971 is when I was sworn in as a deputy sheriff. So that was the only thing that was wrong. Everything else was right on. The case wasn't about Richard. The case was about the investigation. And in being quoted in magazines and different periodicals. Tiller Russell has said, make no mistakes about it. The thrust of this documentary was about a young Hispanic investigator that had a theory that nobody believed in, and he stuck by it. Perseverance paid off, and he's the only one that believed in the beginning and then brought it all together. And so it was really nice. And he called me up and he said, "What'd you think?" And I said, "God, it was more than I ever expected. I had never been involved in a documentary that was this detailed or this professionally done. From the amount of money they were spending out there, it was incredible." And I told him, one of the things I always wanted to do was make my father proud. And in making my dad proud, unfortunately, the night of conviction, my dad had already passed away since then. And I remember coming home, my wife had never seen me cry. And I came home, jumped in bed that night, and I started crying. I cried like a baby. And she just reached over without saying any words, put her arm around me and said, "It's okay. He was with you. Your father was with you." And the next morning I got a call from one of my sisters, said, "Congratulations. And you know Daddy was with you." And I just wish that I wanted him to be proud of me, being able to enjoy the success I had with this case. And so I told Tiller, I said, it made me cry. And now I know my dad was really proud of me, because when I saw certain things in there, it made me cry thinking of him. And I know he's proud of me. And it made me laugh as well. And he says, let me give you a little insight. When we were doing the editing in the studio, when it got to the part of your dad and the pictures of you, I stopped the machine, turned on the lights, looked around, and everybody in the room was crying. So I knew then that we had a hit. I knew it was going to be good. And since then, I've done podcasts, I've done interviews from Australia to all over the world. I've traveled all over the U.S. I worked with George Lopez, the actor, comedian. He's a true crime fan, and I received a phone call from a buddy of mine that said, "Hey, I just heard on the radio that says that anybody know Gil Carrillo, have him call George Lopez," and gave a number. I called, and the short version is it ended up with me going down and doing a podcast with him, and that podcast lasted 2 years. He eventually was calling me his co-host, and it was just a real pleasure. He was so much fun, and he was a good man to me and my family, and I couldn't have asked for anything more. It's like going to a comedy show every week, really for free, and drinking his beer. So it was fun. It ended, and like I said, I was asked, I was supposed to be last year, I was invited to go to Prague, Czechoslovakia, to be a speaker at a seminar back there. And I was ill health, and I didn't think that a 14-hour plane ride would do me good. So I just had to decline the offer. But I get Instagram. They wanted me to go on Instagram. I had nothing on Instagram, and I think I'm up to about 12,000 followers now. I don't know. And I try and answer everybody. And I've got people from all over the world reaching out to me, and I do podcasts all over the place. I've got my next one will be February 12th and February 17th. I'm down the other side of Palm Springs someplace doing speaking engagements. I've spoken at colleges for law enforcement and all over the U.S. And that's what keeps me busy enough, not busy where I'm getting tired. It just occupies my time, and it still gives me plenty of time to spend time with my most valuable assets, and that's my family. My wife, my kids, and my grandkids especially. That's about it.